Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Afami History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
In this episode of Disafimi History Podcast, host Wendy Aris welcomes Professor Francesca Negro, a distinguished dance consultant, researcher, and scholar in comparative literature and performing arts at the University of Lisbon. Holding both a PhD and postdoctoral background in comparative literature, Professor Negro's research bridges movement, language, and history through intermedia and interart studies. Together, they explore her thought-provoking article, Tumba Francesa, Kinetic and Linguistic Archive of the African Diaspora. This conversation delves into how dance, performance, and language preserve the memory and identity of the African diaspora across the Caribbean. Listeners will discover how Tumba Francesa operates not only as a cultural expression, but also as a living historical archive, embodying resistance, rhythm, and remembrance.
So thank you so much, Professor Negro, for coming on to the podcast and to talk about your article, Tumba Francesa Kinetic and Linguistic Archive of the African Diaspora. And this was primarily within Cuba in terms of with dance. So, but before we start, can I just have you do a brief introduction of yourself and then we'll start with the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations for the material that you're sharing. My name is Francesca Negro, and I'm based in Lisbon, actually. I'm Italian, and my original background is from comparative literature, but from there I quickly pass also to the study of performing arts and especially the arts of the diaspora. And because I am a dancer from a very long time, now I'm also a member of an ethnomusicology center of research. And so this background is a mix of various things and interests. And I am really passionate of the culture of the African diaspora and also of various cultures of Africa. And I do my best to swim in this broad sea.
Yes. No, thank you. No,
You
thank
said
you. Because
Tumba Francesca, but it's not. It's Tumba Francesa. We have to point it out
sorry.
because it's really French Tumba.
Okay.
The meaning. It would be too similar to my name otherwise.
Okay. No problem. No, thank you, and well noted. So let's start from the beginning. What first inspired you to delve into Tumba Francesa? What was there a particular moment of the performance or story that really sparked your research?
Well, actually, it was, I wouldn't say coincidence, because I was studying and I was making research for my book. The book was almost ready, and I wanted to visit the Oriente, the Cuban Oriente, the eastern part. And so I had the occasion to see this phenomenon that I knew already theoretically, and to see it personally. And it actually was something that impressed me so much, because I immediately felt something that we normally cannot feel so easily when it's a recording. So that I was studying a lot the African heritage inside Cuban rhythms. And we are normally taught that Tumba Francesa is an European heritage. But that is played with drums. But when I was there, I started feeling that some of the rhythms were actually direct descendants of voodoo rhythms. And so this opened a big window to me, and I said, I need to understand this. I need to understand what this community preserved here, why they are doing this, and how we are still in contact with some direct reflection of what happened in Haiti and the revolution and the historical background of this. And so I started researching from the historical point of view and the performative and the musical point of view, and I brought some things together in my article.
No, absolutely you did. And for the listeners that are new to this tradition, what exactly is Tumba Francesa? How would you describe it? Is it a dance form or a musical practice, or is it a living archive of culture?
It's the three things that you mentioned. It's. I always say that it's a phenomenon because it's a performative phenomenon in the sense that it's made of various layers and elements. First of all, it is composed of different dances sections, as we would observe in the ancient dance sections of the European courts. So this is the frame that we have, and we have, as it was happening in that situation, 3 or 4 dances, normally 4 big dances that would follow one the other. And so is what we see. But we have also the chanting, and we have the percussion, the instruments. And then behind that, we have the constructions of the instruments, which come back in the Caribbean. These kind of instruments are sort of a repetition in different territories, so they already tells us a story. Then we have a language that has been preserved through this phenomena, which is the Haitian Creole. Then it has changed, of course, with the passage to a Spanish-speaking territory. But it stayed alive. And then we have an Asian community of people that moved because this phenomenon actually its origin is in Cuba, but it comes from Haiti, but it develops in Cuba. But the protagonists are actually the population, the enslaved population that followed the coffee producers that were active in Haiti before the revolution.
Yeah, and so where did Tumba Francesa originate? How did it make its way into the Caribbean? And of course, what historical, or I guess, or migratory connections helped to shape its evolution?
It's not easy
Yeah.
to map exactly what happened because not all the countries were actually so interested in having records of what was happening inside the enslaved communities. But we know for sure that since the end of the 17th century, beginning of 18th century in Haiti, there was a well-known phenomenon that was the reproduction of the court dances from enslaved people that were working inside the house. So we know that this was a sort of imitation, grotesque imitation that became interesting to observe even from the masters, and so these people had the freedom to perform these dance and musical forms because of these particular form that this performance had taken. And but what is really interesting is that then we have in Tumba Francesa other elements that are actually the core of the improvisation, the relationship of improvisation between the drummer and the dancer, which happen in Tumba Francesa in a specific rhythmic moment. And we are not sure that this was present in Haiti. And this is the reason why they say that actually this specific form, artistic and performing form, was originated in Cuba. Because we are not sure about probably in Haiti, they had more simple version, or not composed of so many rhythms, for example.
Okay. And then I guess this ties into the next question, I guess, in terms of which regions or communities, is Tumba Francesa still actively practiced today, and how has it been sustained, of course, across the generations?
Yes, I will have to synthesize a lot because there is all the Cuban history inside this and the Haitian history inside this. So it's not easy for me to make a good synthesis. I will try, but I will tell you that. So we have Haitian communities, so coming from broadly saying voodoo religion patterns. And I would say patterns because we are talking about various forms of voodoo practicing. Voodoo is also a syncretism of African religions. So there are different kinds. But the Rada, that is the main one, seems the one that more influenced the elements that are still present in Tumba Francesa. So the Rada branch of voodoo is inside there. So we think that this community were simply trying to put some rhythms that were ritual rhythms for them hidden in the only performing elements that was allowed for them. And so since they were allowed to use and have the drums, which was something that was prohibited in the colonial era, they had this escamotage of having the possibility to play because they were doing something that was accepted. And so they were inclined in hiding elements that were prohibited inside of this frame. And so this was for sure in the first moment of the introduction of these small groups of population that have been able to escape from Haiti to Cuba, a way to protect their own religion, to hide it and to keep it alive. Religion and language, because we had also the part of the singing that was in the original language. But these were very isolated communities, and they were not well accepted in the Spanish speaking country for different reasons. And this had a great influence. So these communities, even the owners of the enslaved populations, they were not well seen because they were competitors on the territory. So they were very isolated, and this is the reason why they have been able to keep the language alive for a longer time with less influences from the Spanish. For example, we see that the more conservative of the three groups in which Tumba Francesa is still alive is the one that is close to is in the province of Holguin, which is the smallest center and the very rural one that actually has no population at all. So there are three groups, and one is in Santiago de Cuba, one is in Guantanamo, and one is in Holguin. The more we observe a connection with the big city, in this case Santiago, the more we see that the Creole started becoming more Spanish and sooner, and that there was a bigger exposition of this material to the power. And so the power controlled it before and more directly. And this is a very important element in terms of religion preservation, because we cannot forget that African religions were prohibited during the colonial era, but also after, because when we have the Cuban Revolution, then all forms of religion becomes also prohibited. So what happens is that they start developing a way to protect themselves, and they start changing the lyrics of the singing. So they just leave all small things, so like the name of certain gods, but they try to give a general narrative and sometimes make it historical, political, social, in order to cover what there was that could create some problems to the community. And even some of the symbology that is danced started being hidden in a certain way or covered. And even the people, the new generations that were entering the community, were not completely informed about the symbology of what they were dancing in order to protect the community. So if, to answer your question a little bit better, if we have a preservation of all these phenomena, but they passed through a theatricalization that was in a certain way vital, because allowed the preservation of the frame in its complexity till us, till the present. At the same time, there are some interference that were made, both internal interference and changings, and also from the outside, because since when Tumba Francesa started being protected by UNESCO also, there is an eye on a sort of choreographic aspect of the dance that is privileged.
No,
so there is
definitely.
also better attention to the aesthetics that maybe was not the original purpose.
Yeah, and you just highlight in terms of how dynamic it had to be in terms of changing in order to still continue and to preserve this particular dance. And Professor Negro, your article really it beautifully highlights Tumba Francesa as a form of oral memory. What does its survival really tell us about the cultural memory as it's passed down from generation to generation in the African diaspora?
Well, we talked about the language, the vocabulary. I would say a lot of vocabulary, but also there is a sense of self-recognition inside some definitions that are still there. And when we talk about oral memory, I think about the lyrics, which partially are still there. I think about the rhythms, because this is oral. This is something that the people reproduce with their voices, and the voice is the first element that appears in Tumba Francesa. The chorus is the solo singer is the most important element, because it's a figure that is usually the director of the group and open the space. And this is also a sense of cleaning the space through the word. The power of the words in African cultures are very important. And so there is this element of the presence of the singing, not just to sing, but to expose the presence of the person and to shape the space through the voice.
Yes, very powerful stuff. And you as well, you write about the three key foundations of cultural memory. Can you just explain what these are and how they manifest, of course, in Tumba Francesa performances, music, and language?
Yeah. We have the dance. So the dance itself and the performance is made of collective, couple, and solo dances. And they come in various different parts, connected to different kind of rhythms. So the first part is usually we saw some changes. Okay, so we are so lucky that we still have ancient articles of ethnomusicologists that saw previous versions that are a little bit more complex. But generally, right now we have three big moments. Let's say the first rhythm is the masoon. So the first dance is a collective dance that reproduces all the court dance dynamics that come from the ancient dances like Minuet, Rigaudon, the Lancer, and so these big English chains, the movement of under the arch of other people, and these movements that are present in all Latin America, actually, because these dances were preserved in that way. So this is the first part, and it's all played with percussions, of course. And then we have the frente, and the yuba. The yuba is very interesting because the yuba is a part of a collective dance, but it's a collective dance made with couples. So just couples, 4-6 couples, normally 6, that dance exchanging the partners and then dance all together. And then some couples are isolated and they performed as protagonists, actually. And then one dancer can be isolated and dance with 2 women, for example. But there is just this shift between the group and the couples, which is also a step in the evolution of social dancing. So it's really interesting in itself. And Juba was actually divided in 2 different rhythms. So this actually reflects two different moments in this dance. And then there is a part that is very, very interesting because it's the one that retains more direct connection to the African heritage. That is the frente. So what happens in the frente is that the premier, which is the big drum that has the more high pitch sound, turns and from vertical becomes horizontal, and the player, the drummer, sits on it and started having a dialogue with the dancer. The male dancer, that is generally the director of the dance group, or a solo dancer that is chosen in that day. And so this dialogue is very specific, and it's a interesting characteristic of, very typical of the African way of considering dance, because the 2 are challenging one the other. And we know, as the more we research African dances, the more we know that in this moment, the real protagonist is the dancer. Mm. This is an element that we find in other dances of the Caribbean, because actually what we see is that the dancer is synchronized with the drummer. And so there is this protagonism of one of the drums and the dancer that is challenging. But what is actually happening is that the dancer is also challenging the drummer, and the drummer needs to catch all the elements that the dancer is suggesting. So this specific character is something that is related to the capacity of the person to dance, to produce music, which is exactly the contrary of all the European and Western heritage that sees dance as an aesthetic, a relation with a rhythm that is already there. So to understand all these phenomena, we have first of all to deconstruct our concept of music and dance as something that music is a block that is always the same. And no, I mean, here we have a dialogue between a percussion that reproduced a pattern and that an improvisation, and also an improvisation that has got patterns but can come out of the patterns because of what the dancer is suggesting. And then we have a dancer that needs to be able to enter in a base and react to a pattern, but at the same time to produce mentally a rhythm that he suggests to the musician.
Yeah, just showing that connection between them both, that they have to, it's not that just one, they both need to be together. So yeah. With
and then sorry to complete the answer, then we have a final contradanza normally, so another collective dance that has got something that normally is very typical, like either a very classical contradanza with all the movements, or sometimes also one of those dances that are they call it danza de cintas in Spanish. So there are different tissues with different colors, and people are dancing around a wooden stick that has got all these elements, and it produces a specific shape, and this might actually end the performance. So this is what we normally see in terms of dancing. The rhythms, I already mentioned them, so this is the music, so the element of the music. And then, of course, there is all the other physical elements, so that is the costumes, the drums, and the materials of the drums, the shapes, and who's got the right to play the drums, so the hierarchies, and all these dynamics that are absolutely social dynamics, because these were a little community inside a bigger community, so they were very organized.
Definitely. And of course, with Tumba Francesa, it includes, I guess, 4 distinct dance movements, each, with ties to the African continent, which I think you mentioned in the previous answer. But would you be able to walk us through, these stages with the deeper meanings of origins?
Yeah, so the first part actually has got it's interesting because these elements are very subtle. Because it's the part that is more similar to the French dances from the courts. But what we see is that, for example, the steps are very, very small. It's like a march. So during these group dynamics, they simplified the steps very much, and they made the steps very simple. But the movement of the body becomes oscillating, and there is this bouncing, very soft bounce, and this rib cage movement that is there in all the dances that comes from Benin and the Yoruba tradition, and even in some Congo dances. And so there is this movement that is very, very peculiar, and that is there all the time. So even if we would have just an image of the dance taken in the right moment, we could see that is actually there is an African imprinting in this specific part. In the second part, there is the Yuba, and the Yuba, especially in the couple part, shows a very interesting step. A very interesting step that is the dynamic. It's not easy to explain. It's a little slide back, and then in counter time, and then there is the other foot is going forward at the same time. So the 2 feet are changing their position rhythmically, but they're just sliding on the floor. They're not moving a lot. And I asked about this step because it's very similar to the step that we see a lot in the smallest version of samba, that is samba miudinho, and also is very similar to the dynamic, the sliding, and the opposition of the feet that is played in another very famous Cuban rhythm, that is this chacharocafu. And so I asked about this, and they said that probably this was a movement that was also for sure used in the action of peeling the coffee. That was done in the secaderos, and so that it was a very long process, and so people wouldn't do it with the hands. It was just too much, and so they would step on it, and they could not lift the steps a lot. Otherwise, they would do the wrong movement, and so they were just sliding. So even if that was not maybe the original reason to do the step, but they would use that step that was a ritual step for them, probably even in the execution of their daily work. So there is this physical memory. And then, of course, in the frente, we saw that there is this dynamic of the dialogue with the drummer. And in this dynamic, there is something that also we see in the most traditional version of the dances of some orishas in the Yoruba tradition, and also in the foldunes of the Dahomey tradition of dances. That is the origin that gave then input to the Vodun. And so we see that, for example, the moment in which the drum is supposed to play harder are marked with movement of the arms towards the sky, either towards the sky or towards the ground, or kicks in the direction of the drums. So these movement are associated to specific meanings very often in African dances, and it's very often either the fertility. So, for example, taking the energy from the sky and bringing it to the earth. So there is this kind of meanings that is hidden inside here also, and then the kick is also an element of these family of gestures. So we have these vocabulary, these symbols that are hidden here, and many others. There are some elements that are done at the beginning. For example, the maracas are passed in the room to clean the space, and the tour that the man proposes to the ladies when there are the three of them dancing are done always in the same direction. There is a ritual reason for that. So there are some specific symbologies.
And so do we see like any echoes of Tumba Francesa elsewhere across the Caribbean or the Americas? Like you mentioned that, yes, it's in Cuba, Haiti, but are there any other spaces of Afro descendants expressing this or using this dance?
You know, what happens is that I should tell you yes and no, because we have actually is a research that I started and I would like to complete. We should map all the forms of quadrille and contredanse that we find in the Central American, Latin American general, let's call it Latin, very bad term, but also in South American, because they're present everywhere. And so, I mean, according to my experience, this is the only moment in which I see the reproduction of the dynamic of the quadrille, but with the African dance inside, which is the part of the solo dance. Otherwise, we can have an adjustment of instruments, and we can find a transculturation of the instruments and the rhythms. But normally the dynamic of the contredance stay closed. So there's no other kind of forms of gestural form that interfere in this. On the other side, if we just separate this part and we take it out from this frame, we find it in many other places of the Caribbean, like in Puerto Rico, in Bomba, in Guoca, in Guadeloupe. We find some specific elements that are interesting and similar in Belé, in Martinica, in Cumina, in Jamaica, and Trinidad. And so we actually still have a lot of work to do to map all these elements and understand exactly what are the roots and the heritage that is inside this phenomenon. As far as I know, this is the only frame in which everything is represented. The two forms are represented together.
Yeah, that's great. And good to know that I guess there's some, even though it hasn't been fully mapped out, but to know that in terms of the countries that you mentioned, the Caribbean islands, that there is some form of expression of this tradition there as well. So, music is very central to this tradition. What are some of the core? I know you mentioned about the drum, but are there any other core instruments that are used in Tumba Francesa? And what role does rhythm play in maintaining both the performance and, of course, its communal spirit?
There are two main drums. The premier, the premier is the one that has got the dialogue with the dancer more specifically, and the boula. The boula, which is a term that comes back also in other countries of the Caribbean and is related to the voodoo tradition very directly, this term. And so this is already specificity. And then the kata, which is a drum that is all made all in wood, so there are no skin, and is played on both sides and can be played even with sticks. It's played with sticks and can be played by the women, not specifically, can be played. And also the tambora, which is another element that is specific of this dance and music form. The kata is actually a very interesting element, because without the kata we cannot have the pattern. So it has got the same role as a clave. It gives an orientation to all the rhythms.
Yeah. And your research also connects Tumba Francesa to language preservation, and we've talked about it, we've discussed it throughout this conversation. How has this tradition helped to sustain the Creole and other African linguistic elements over time?
Unfortunately, right now, this language is not preserved outside, almost. I would say almost, and I will tell you why. But it's not officially, it's not preserved outside of this phenomenon. I say officially because I know some people that still preserves ritual and religious dynamics, and so they have their own ceremonies in Haitian religion. So they do voodoo ceremonies. These voodoo ceremonies are not entirely done in Haitian anymore, so in Creole, but they still preserve elements, and some elements of the liturgy are, of course, in the original language that was brought there. But officially, this is not well known, and we cannot measure it because these circumstances are not open to all the public. Yeah. So, unfortunately, we cannot talk about living language because it's just pieces of vocabulary and syntax and specific expression. But at least we have that.
Yes, we have that connection. So, and I guess, as we look to the future, what efforts are being made to document and to teach, and of course to safeguard Tumba Francesa for future generations?
We are in front of big debate about that because UNESCO recognized Tumba Francesa as heritage, intangible heritage, a term that I don't like at all. What is intangible of all this? It is embodied heritage, I would say. But so these are the efforts that are done. These people are visited and are actually on the map for what is to be seen in the island. And so a lot of tourists go there, and these dances are studied, and some experts from the universities go there and help them, if they want and if they agree, to have their own choreographies monitorized and eventually correct or improved. And this is especially valid because for Guantanamo. Okay. Because the Tumba Francesa of Guantanamo is a specific recreative society that was considered the most representative one. And so they are especially followed by this system also of control and help, and they are actually the representative of the style in the island. So this implies that UNESCO also made a lot of interviews and recordings. They stage very nice documentaries that are in open access online, and they are staged at the ancient coffee farm Isabelica that is close to Santiago, for example, one of them. And it's very interesting because we can actually see the space and the dynamics in correct location. I mean, and the one that was the original one. In terms of music, they also made a transcription of the singing. We have, I think that they copied 10 songs for each of the three locations. So we have at least 30 songs that are transcribed and translated into Spanish. And then I think that we can find it translated, or I did the translation, so I don't remember if the other ones now are out or not. At the time, I had to translate it in English myself because I didn't find the English version. But anyway, they did a lot of work in this sense. Unfortunately, I have to mention that this is not enough to keep it alive as a phenomenon. Because our societies are living, I mean, even in the slower rhythm of Cuba, are living at a different pace, and so they are not into the preservation of these as a community. So they keep it alive because this is a touristic attraction. Mm-hmm. And it's very related to the family. So it's very representative for some specific families. Mm-hmm. But then the majority of the young ones are not as much as interested as the previous generations, of course.
Yeah, which is, I mean, there's good and bad if you want to, you know, however you want to see it. But, you know, as we come to a close with this particular episode, Professor Negro, what message would you like to leave the listeners about the significance of this culture form today?
I was really impressed by the fact that in Cuba, not now, but from the 60s, and we can find in the society and even in literature some memories of the treatment of Haitian people, and there was a discrimination. So there was a discrimination that was very clear. First of all, Cuba was a country in which discrimination was very cruel. So the Cubans, the Spanish-speaking Cubans, had found suddenly somebody else that could be a victim of discrimination. So their story is really sad. And they found the significance of their existence there in this specific community. Their memories through the lyrics and the interviews that we have with the elder people, they shift their identity continuously. They define themselves as French Cubans, French, and then African. So they were so stigmatized for being Asians that they say, we've never been Asians. But this is not because there was something actually bad inside of this, but this is also an heritage of the history, because what I want to highlight here is that we don't know the story exactly with the details that we should know and that should be presented in the history books. So the Haitian Revolution moved so much, shaped so much that society that being an Haitian slave was a danger in another country. And they had to defend themselves, to protect themselves and isolate themselves, because they were representing the bigger revolution that the colonial system had, and probably one of the most important revolution of the world history, because it was the first time that the same economic power that we're still inside now was shaken from inside. So this created a very big impact, and these people moved, and they knew that the only way to be something more than slaves was to declare that they were French, because they had French owners.
Yes.
And to be more than Asian and just Afro-Cubans, they could be African, because they knew they were coming from higher origins.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these adjustments of identity, this is the representation of so many communities. And the effort to find our roots and to fit in somehow it has been so desperate from a long time. Now these communities are totally Afro-Cuban. They use, as the colonial system taught everybody to do, they define themselves very well as Creole.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that this definition has been useful for a long time to just define a little space for this identity and to find a value for these cultures, I see that the struggle is still on, and we still have to search a little bit more to find more interesting element that can tell us more about these cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Tumba Francesa, because this has been very enlightening. And again, as we talked about before we recorded, is that this is just another form of how memory is transferred and how things are. So again, thank you so much for your time and so much for talking about this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.